So this section of Chapter 11 really focuses on school achievement. So this is the second part of Chapter 11, Cognitive Development in Elementary School, and your text calls it Middle Childhood. So often tied with cognition is language, and so in regards to school achievement and language, children increase in all areas of language development and in metalinguistic awareness. And remember that meta means thinking and knowing, and linguistic is language, and so metalinguistic awareness is the ability to reflect on language, so thinking about language. Communication skills and abilities to construct a narrative improve, and in elementary school level, the focus switches from being mostly on the child themselves to focusing on other people and other perspectives. And their receptive vocabulary increases, so their ability to understand what others are communicating to them also increases, and partially because they're not so focused on their own perspective, but they can think about other people's perspective when they move into concrete operations. For children who are English is not their first language, so English language learners, and these are children who need assistance in learning language. There are two approaches to teaching English. There is the ESL approach, the English as a second language approach, and then there's the bilingual education approach. And when we look at the research on comparing these two approaches, what tends to work the best in a school situation is the bilingual education program rather than English as a second language program. And part of that is because if you started out learning one language, you're going to be thinking in a more sophisticated way in regards to that language, and so it makes sense to provide reading and math instruction in the language you understand the best. But you will notice here that vocabulary development in English is pretty similar. The development, of course, it starts out lower in a particular language, but it increases at the same rate for both. So for example, ELL is an English language learner. So of course, if they're just starting out learning English, they're going to start way down at the bottom in grade 1. And the child who started speaking English and only English from the very beginning would start a bit higher, but you can see the rate of increase going from grade 1 to grade 6. It increases at the same rate, it's just a little bit lower for the English language learner. So when we talk about literacy development, there's really 3 stages, and here we're talking about stages that start in elementary school and in first grade, so we're not talking about pre-operational. Remember, we talked about emergent literacy there, a perspective where learning to read happens before they're even born by listening to communication and language inside the womb. This is mostly focused on learning to read, starting in first grade. So stages 1 and 2 go from ages 6 to 8, and they're focused on 3 key skills: phonological awareness, or the awareness of the sounds of language, and then phonological decoding, the ability to take those different sounds that are made by alphabet letters and putting those together and decoding those to read a word. And then sight word vocabulary. And those are words you can't really sound out. You have to memorize because they don't follow the rules of the particular sounds that are being used. And so those are the skills that are focused on in first, second, and third grade. And then stage 3, starting at age 9, the focus is really going to be on reading comprehension. So the ability to think about what you've read and create mental models of events, locations, and ideas related to what's being read. So there are different methods of teaching reading. And we have, actually there's 3 methods, but we have 2 depicted here. And so whole language approach, this is more of an intellectual focus that helps children problem solve and think more intellectually. And this whole language approach assumes that children learn to read naturally. And this more follows along the emergent literacy perspective we talked about for preschool children. It uses language in meaningful texts, and reading in meaningful texts like focusing on a child's name, focusing on them writing stories and reading their stories, focusing on things the children are interested in, things in their everyday life. And it has children read whole interesting books early on instead of just focusing on reading things that are drill and practice focused. Then there's the phonics approach, which has more of an academic focus. It's drill and practice. It assumes children need basic decoding skills first, and so it will focus on flashcards and worksheets and memorizing and saying things over and over. It teaches the children pattern recognition, and then it focuses on worksheets. And so and then the third one that's not on here is the sight word memorization approach, which just focuses on memorizing what they see. And so you might wonder, well, what's the most effective approach? Overall, we would want to make sure that we're using all 3 approaches, because if you use all 3 approaches, they all have weaknesses and they all have strengths. If we use all 3, we're more likely to make sure that all of our children are successful in learning to read. We want to make sure that we help all of the children to achieve this skill. And so this chart tells us the key characteristics. And remember, these are averages. Some children are ahead, some are average, some are behind. But these are stages of reading and writing development in the United States. And so stage 0 is ages 2 to 6. And this focuses on spoken language development, letter recognition of what's familiar to them, being aware of sounds, and being exposed to reading storybooks. Stage 1 from 1st and 2nd grade, this is more about formal literacy instructions and learning spelling and sounds, starting to do spelling words and reading simple texts on their own. Stage 2 is 2nd and 3rd grade, and they master basic decoding rules, reading more fluently in a greater variety of texts, and spells more complex words. Stage 3 is ages 9 to 14, or grades 4 to 9. And here, instead of just learning to read, now they're focused more on reading to learn and writing more complex assignments and ideas, and being more skilled at all of those things. And then stage 4, grades 10 to 12, reads more widely and can adopt multiple viewpoints, writes pages for more than one point of view. And so, and remember, these are average expectations.